Hello, everybody, and welcome to GCC's Career Services Speaker Series. We are so excited for you to be joining us live from home. We are super excited to have our first guest speaker today. Because this is our first time, I should probably introduce what we're doing here. So the goal of this is to really get different perspectives from industry leaders to share their leadership experience and transformation. And this will be the first of many in which we will have different speakers. And so to kick it off and get started, I'm going to go ahead and have Dakota, who also works with me in career services at GCC, introduce our speaker that we have today. So go ahead, Dakota.
Perfect. Well, our speaker today is Jeff Vivacqua. He is the Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer at Cambridge Investment Research. They're located in Iowa, but they are opening up an office here in Phoenix. So it's going to be really great to hear from you and get some insight. So a little bit about Jeff. With over 20 years of industry experience, Jeff Vivacqua has an active role in managing strategic initiatives for Cambridge that affect independent financial professionals, including marketing, sales, and business education and development, while enhancing and expanding the digital strategies and solutions financial professionals need on a client-facing basis. Vivacqua earned a Bachelor of Science degree in finance from Southern Illinois University and has certificates in personal finance planning and facilitative leadership training programs. He also holds the FINRA Series 4, 7, 24, 63, and 66 licenses, and is a member of the Financial Services Institute, or FSI. So I think Izell is going to give us some icebreakers, Jeff, but thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here. Glad to be part of the kickoff for the show that Izell just talked about.
Thanks. Yeah, we're so excited to have you, Jeff. So we decided that before we get started with any speaker, because we're gonna really dive into your career and your leadership, but to kind of get to know you maybe a little bit on a personal level, we have decided to do a series of rapid fire questions. So we don't want you to think about it. It's just kind of like question, answer, good icebreaker, get the nerves out if we have any, and then we'll go straight into our leadership questions. If you are joining us live, if you have any questions, feel free to add your comments and we can ask Jeff while we have him. All right, so our first rapid fire questions. What is the last show or series you watched on TV?
Cobra Kai on Netflix. Just finished it this past Friday. And being a child of the 80s and 80s movies, music, it was... While I could say cheesy, it was still a fun flashback to the original Karate Kid with Ralph Macchio and stuff. And you actually find yourself laughing at some of the 80 references, some of the references from the 80s and stuff, that period of time, as well as the music and some of the other things. So just finished that and starting on the next one.
Awesome. I saw the previews for that. I'm going to have to go check that out. Okay. If you were famous, what would you be famous for?
I would probably say if I was going to be famous, I used to be a DJ in college.
Oh,
so I was a club jock and all house music. Being originally from Chicago, I would probably say, getting back to that, if I wasn't doing this and talking to you today about financial services and leadership, I'd probably still be DJing.
Very cool. All right. What is the last song you sung out loud?
Well, it's funny you say that. I was listening to a DJ from Chicago on a Facebook Live page on Sunday night, and it's old Chicago house music, White Knight, Fast Eddie. You actually just come back singing those songs from the 80s and the 90s again.
Cool. So cool. Okay. Would you rather be completely invisible for one day or be able to fly for a day?
I am a superhero fan. It's funny you say that. So I would say between Marvel and DC, I'm a Batman fan. You can't see my Christian Bale Batman artwork in my office here. But if I had to pick between flying and invisible, I'll take flying.
Cool. All right. What is your favorite summertime food?
I'm pizza. I'm pizza year round.
Okay.
Sausage pizza, cut in squares, can't beat it.
And you said you're from Chicago, right? So you probably
thin crust, not thick, thin crust. So okay. I'm originally, you may not know this, Chicago. After school, I moved out to Phoenix. So I lived in Tempe and then Chandler for pretty much about 15 years. So the people at Oregano's were a spot of some pizza that was really good close to home, as well as Rosati's and a few other places. So
Very nice.
can't go too far from good pizza.
Very cool. All right. The last one, fill in the blank. Leadership is?
It's an acquired skill.
Okay.
It's a knowledge-based and an acquired skill.
Awesome. Well, that concludes our rapid series. That was kind of fun. I'm glad that we decided to do this because this really gave us a little bit of insight. All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. And Dakota will ask the first question.
Yeah, so besides your bio that I obviously read off, can you tell us a little bit more about your position specifically and what you do at Cambridge?
Sure. So Cambridge, as you mentioned, was a financial solutions firm. We, as called an independent firm, we have 3,600 financial professionals all across the country that work with end clients just like yourselves. So helping you reach your investment goals and objectives. All of them, from a regulatory perspective, have to do their business through a firm like Cambridge. So we not only serve from a compliance and supervision perspective, we also have a marketing and sales function. And that's the side of the house that I sit on for Cambridge. So my role as the marketing officer, I oversee our sales efforts. We market platforms, programs, and tools and services to all of our 3,600 financial professionals. We also oversee consulting. So we have consulting programs, coaching programs. No one financial professional starts the journey on our side of the business and knows everything. It's an ongoing knowledge of products and services. It's an ongoing knowledge of leadership. They all have different sized offices. It could be a solo office. It could be an office that has 50 people inside, and they all take different skills. So we have a consulting program. They are an advisor at heart, talking about products and services to meet investment goals, but they also run and own their own businesses. They're leaders. So their leadership hat to manage people in their office, to do payroll, to develop client relationships, service-orientated, operational-orientated aspects. They wear multiple hats. They're just not always an advice hat, which sometimes is thought of in the investment professional world as you're only talking about advice and what should I buy or what should I sell. No, you're wearing a lot of different hats at any one time in financial solutions.
Perfect. And you hold such, when you say, executive vice president and chief marketing officer, you hold such a very, great role at your company and organization. But how did you get there? Like, I'm curious to know where did you start and what do you believe kind of attributed to your success?
It's been a journey. It's probably close to 25 years now on that journey. And I went to school. It's funny you say, while I talked about what I might be famous for earlier, Giselle, I actually went to school for aviation. I wanted to be a commercial pilot. And after the first year, decided to switch out of aviation and went into financial services. And it had a dual approach. It had the investment markets and it had real estate. My family was commercial and residential real estate growing up and other businesses. So I saw a certain side of business and a certain side of management or leadership, I'll say, but I wasn't sure which one I wanted to go to, which path. So I did both, came out, and it was like 8 of us, and we said, let's just move to Phoenix, someplace warm, wanted to get out of Illinois. And we chose Phoenix. So 8 of us moved, the degree on the wall, and said, let's go someplace new and start up. And for me, I hit Phoenix and immediately got a job at Schwab over in the Biltmore area. Mm-hmm. And that was my first experience outside of education for financial services. And I was there for about a year before another company came calling. His name was Sun America Securities. And that point is I transitioned from Schwab to a smaller independent firm at the time, which has grown and they're still around just with under a new name. But that was my foray into marketing and sales and leadership positions, and where I started to meet a lot of people along my journey. It started there back in 1994 when I moved to the Valley. So for me, I have seen a lot in that journey, to your question. What I realized and learned early on was that I was a sponge. When it came to knowledge, I led through knowledge, meaning the more I knew that was going on around different sides of the firm, the more I could stand in front of somebody, stand in front of another advisor, and talk intelligently. I didn't have to be the expert, but I had a general understanding of different things that were going on. So I thought my best path was the sponge route, showing up, executing my regular role, but also being around and being involved in other projects, knowing other projects that were going on, even if I wasn't involved. I saw that as the path to being recognized as a potential top performer is probably a good way of saying it. And then top performer or high performer, those kind of categories lead you down the leadership path, where I think you're talking about what's that transformational journey. It's how do you transform yourself from a top performer into leadership, and then how do you become a top leader and advance to a senior vice president, an executive vice president, or potentially the president or CEO. It is to your title, it is transformational. There's different steps along the way, and you're going to do different things in each part of that journey. So for me, I saw myself trying to take advantage of an opportunity when it presented itself. And that might not be the same for everybody, depending on the business that you choose or the career path you choose and the industry you choose. And what I mean by that is financial services, there's probably not more than 5 or 6 firms in the Valley, for example, when I first moved there. The ones I mentioned, Sun America Securities, Schwab, and a few others that have come in the last 25 years to the Valley. So if I wanted to stay in financial services and move up, potentially that may not have been in the Valley. And for me, I was lucky enough to get some opportunities within the firms I was working with, but those opportunities asked me to relocate. So for me, I relocated from Phoenix to San Diego to New York back to Phoenix, and then I switched companies after 10 years. I was with the same company in all those relocations. And then went from there to Florida with another company for 5 years. And then that company went through a consolidation. I'll talk about that too if we get there. And then I've been with Cambridge the last 10 years. So Florida, back to Phoenix, to Iowa, as Dakota mentioned, where Cambridge is housed out of while we're expanding in Phoenix. So for me, my path was being able to take advancement opportunities without staying in a local location. Would I be in the same spot if I didn't take advantage of some of those opportunities? I try not to think about regrets or look back at that, but I probably believe that maybe some of those doors wouldn't have opened at the right time. They may have opened at some point in the future, but maybe not as fast as they did if I didn't make those choices. So for me, location wasn't a barrier to pursuing another step or sitting where I wanted to sit. I've always known that I wanted to sit as close to, if not in a president's chair of a financial solutions firm. So the question was, what do I need to do and learn and advance in order to potentially give myself the opportunity to sit there? So for me, that was a long journey to get where I am. So warm weather back to cold weather in Iowa.
Yes. So, being a leader, you are probably a mentor yourself. So when you were maybe at Sun America, did you have a mentor who taught you kind of how to become where you are now, or did they kind of help guide you to the place that you're at now? Do you think it was helpful having a mentor?
I do. I think there's 2 names that resonate for me. But to answer your first question, I think it's good for being a mentor and a mentee relationship, because then you're giving back. But there's also something that we've learned over the years, that sometimes it's good for us to be the mentee and have somebody else. And sometimes it could be in the next generation down a couple to give back to us we act as the mentee. So we've personally sat on both sides of that. And I believe personally and professionally, you have to. Otherwise, you may lose touch with parts of your audience, or in this example, some of our associates that could be inside the firm that can see something that we may not see. So I think we need to do both. But from a leadership perspective, even before Sun America, the first one goes back to high school, actually. And it probably wasn't until after that I really realized it, probably after college. He was our high school analysis and trigonometry teacher. His name was Mr. Verkus, from the suburbs of Chicago. And he taught us this thing. If you were passing analysis and trig with 90% or better, you didn't have to hand in your homework. And if you had a grade that was less than that, you had to hand in your homework. So he made people try to be accountable to themselves. And, you start off the year and you're like, and live true story, right? I had the 90%, so I stopped doing my homework. I didn't have to hand it in. And then all of a sudden you're like, wake up one day and you're like, I'm a little bit below 90%. and then you're like, I was not keeping up. You were just kind of phoning it in, and all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're behind. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until later on that I realized the lesson that he was teaching us. He was teaching us to be accountable going into college. If you're not going to be able to do your own homework, then you're probably going to fall behind. I just didn't realize it at the time, junior year of high school, when he was teaching us that lesson. Then you get to my first work experience with Sun America, and this CFO, probably the first time I saw what I would consider a positive leader in the workforce, was some things can always go bump in the night, and an issue can go wrong, and it did, and it involved me. I was overseeing the trading desk, as we called it, where all the financial professionals would execute trades for their clients, whether it be stocks, mutual funds, bonds, etc. So something happened that didn't go the way that the financial professional thought it should go. We fixed the problem. We dealt with the issue and tried to make everybody happy, the client and the advisor. But it still generated noise, I'll call it, within the firm. So the CFO, his name was George Verwick, he had come out, he heard about the issue, and he came out and he asked just what the scenario was, give him the background, tell him what happened. And at the end of the conversation, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't say anything. He looked at me and he said, how you handle it is good, but maybe next time you might want to think about looking at the issue from this way and look at it from this perspective. And it was just a different way of teaching and impacting behavior. Mm-hmm. So it was probably my first lesson of how you can impact behavior without, some of the old stereotypes, raising your voice, yelling, chastising an associate or an employee, or belittling them. It was a way of saying that was good, but there's probably a better way of doing it, and gave me the ability to think about it myself and find my own answer, or find it without him saying to me, do X, Y, and Z, and then I never learned to do it myself. Mm-hmm. That was probably the two people that got me started from a leadership foundation.
Yeah, those are great stories to share. Like, when I'm listening to you, the things that kind of stuck out to you is that constant learner. So you had talked about like just being a sponge and soaking up as much information as you can and being open to opportunities. But it also connected the dots for me, because you said as a leader, you should sit on both ends, be a mentor and a mentee. So it's not allowing us to be so comfortable, right, with where we're at, but also know that even, being a successful individual at a company, being open and responsive to our younger leaders, because they may have different perspectives, and we don't want to get so complacent, right? Like we get so stuck on our old ways of how we typically run or do things. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I'm listening, and I even know I recently had to do some mentor coaching, and my coach did one of those things that you were kind of sharing, was letting me see things from a different perspective, which was so helpful. Like, I found our coaching sessions to be very enlightening and very helpful for me as a newer leader. And so what you're sharing, it's like, oh my gosh, yes, that's so true. Like, yes. So thank you for sharing those two examples. It was really, really great to hear. One of the things that also that I wanted to ask, because I think we all kind of define leadership and success in different ways. So kind of just wanted to get your perspective on, what does success mean to you, and what does it mean to be a leader?
Let's start with the first one. There's a personal and professional approach to success from that definition, right? What's going to make you happy personally and professionally? When we interview candidates, one of my questions might be, what wakes you up in the morning about financial services? What is that drive? What you're trying to figure out is if somebody is looking at this, and I think you're using the right terminology, it's a career, right? It's not a job. So you try to look for people that are looking for a career, not a job, because nothing is 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 anymore. There are some things where you may be 9 to 5 and not have to think about anything. In our industry, and dealing with advisor relationships and client relationships and investments, they're long-term retirement monies. There's nothing that is on a clock. It's ongoing in the relationship and making sure that we're there delivering a service that they're then delivering to their end client. So from that perspective, I get back to the personal and professional approach. What wakes you up in the morning, number one, and what's the drive? And we all have different social styles. So from a development of success, I know what I like to do. I also have a personal drive of growing up with, and I'll call it with and without money. And I personally have lived both lives going up through college years of being more well off, being less well off. So I had a drive to never go backwards. And I've seen both sides. My drive is a different drive, both personally and professionally, that I want to be better than some of the experiences I had growing up, give back to family that took care of things through school and got me through school. And then my daughter and my niece, how do I give back to them to share the same experiences and give them guidance and stuff. So for me, I have a very strong personal motivation to succeed, but not at the success from a professional that I lose the personal side. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got to find their balance. And at different times of your career, you could be a little bit more personal than professional, or a little bit more professional than personal, and it's going to evolve. And I think your point about, or your comment earlier about of how people walk into this, everybody's going to choose the path. And success isn't defined in a number of days or a number of years for anybody on the stream today. Success is defined of every day. It should be defined every day. So you should have success in the things you do. Some days may be harder, some days may be earlier. Is success going to be defined in 5 years or 10 years or 20 or 1? It could be all of those. Mm-hmm. There's an investment strategy, not to be too technical, but it's referred to more of a bucket approach. This bucket or goal, I want to do X. This bucket or goal, I want to do Y. So instead of collectively trying to boil the ocean, you start to define success for all these little things. Oh, I want to go here, or I want a boat, or I want to do this, or a house with a pool, whatever that looks like. They don't have to be big, audacious goals. They could be small goals along the way. So don't get wrapped around the axle. I'm going to work in every cliche possible, is not to get wrapped around the axle of success has to be X. Mm-hmm. You have to define it and what makes you happy. And if there's something more you want, then you keep pushing out that little end goal. So for me, getting back to me, what does it mean to me and the things that I've gone to be a leader? It's having to learn the difference. That's a learned thing. You asked me earlier, I said it's an acquired skill. You don't know that coming out of school. You don't know, nobody knows any of that coming out of school. You could have a good foundation of base or experience, an intern and extern, family business experiences with other leaders potentially. You start to get a good foundation, but you have to keep building on it, and you have to keep watching for those things. And that's where the sponge comes in. There's always going to be good and bad leaders. The question is what do you take from good and bad leaders, mm-hmm. or good and bad associates that you work with, and be like, that's good, I should remember that, or that's bad, I'm never going to do it like that. Even as a leader, mm-hmm. that's part of leadership and learning, is learning the good and the bad. And I've seen every leader along the way I would say there's something good I've taken from, and there's something bad that I would say that's not how I want to be. It's not how I would apply it. But there's always going to be something that I know that I didn't have before. I gleamed it because it wasn't there before in myself. But then how do I think about it, and then how do I apply it myself? How do I find Jeff's way of using those skills?
Very cool.
Yeah, that is really great. Sorry, Izal, do so Jeff, you work on, although you are a leader in your industry, you also work on a team of other leaders. So I think it would be great for our students to actually hear how you balance being a team member amongst multiple leaders and how that interaction works. As our students go throughout college, they'll be in a position where they're probably working with other leaders just as themselves, but they'll have to work with them as a team. So how do you balance that, being a leader, but also working on a team?
This may sound like a stretch of a connection a little bit, Dakota, but no matter if you're the president or CEO, you always answer to somebody. You're either answering to a stockholder, or you're answering to a customer, or you're answering to your associates who are looking up for guidance or looking for support or leadership. So, it's never really a triangle where there's somebody at the top making all the decision. Sometimes, again, depending on how you want to define leadership and success, decision-making could have a lot of different approaches and a lot of different companies. And all of the people on the stream today may have an idea going in of what is decision-making or leadership, but you're going to learn different ways. For all the different companies you work with, you're going to see different ways to develop decision-making. And Cambridge is no different. To your point, I may run a number of different functional areas of our company, and I have in other firms. But at the top here, we have 8 people who oversee different tops, what we refer to as our executive team. So our executive team, there's 8 of us, and we sit around as a collective group, including our founder and chairman and our CEO and president. We're all there with a voice at the table. So when we have conversations about strategic direction or decision-making that could impact all 900 associates of the firm, we're usually having a conversation, and 8 of us to 9 of us can sit at a table and bring out pros and cons of different situations at different times. No one leader at a table is going to know everything about everything. So we all know our role. You know what your skills are. Even though I try to say to Azel's question and your question earlier about being a sponge, I know I'm not going to know everything sitting at the table from different sides of the business. The things that I can speak intelligently on, I show up, have an opinion, and I say something. And that's my role, to be at the table. And I think that's the role of everybody else at a leadership table, is to be engaged, show up, have an opinion, and say something. And at the end of the day, it's never usually one person vetoing the other 8 people and saying, no, we're going to do this. It's usually some good spirited conversation of making sure we haven't missed anything, the pros and the cons. I jokingly refer to that as management by consensus. And some people may be like, oh, can't just one person make a decision? Well, leadership in this example, our chairman and our CEO have said to themselves, they don't have to make it. That's a choice as a leader they made, to say, I want to build a table of 8 people that are all running the company and can all be responsible for different things. So if something goes bump in the night, somebody else is here to know what's going on, could step in temporarily. That is a form of leadership right there that they chose. They don't have to be the decision maker for everything. And the buck doesn't have to stop with one person per se. So a long-winded story, but that's how I would say is our approach to it is. It's different than I've been in other firms that it is more like the triangle at the top. And I've seen different measurements of success, and I would choose management by consensus with its good and its bad, because there's no perfect leadership style. And if anybody out there thinks when you're going through upper level management classes, you're going to learn about different approaches and critical thinking and decision making and a SWOT analysis and a 5 forces model, all these different terms that we all went through in school ourselves, they're all tools. They're all tools to help you make decisions, but you doesn't necessarily mean one person. You could mean a group of people. So in a team, coming back to your question, long-winded, in a team approach, that serves me well because I never lose the concept of there's other people in the room, there's other people that can share an opinion, even if they're not a decision. They could be in the room because they're a subject matter expert and they have an opinion and they say something, and it helps the people who are responsible for making decisions make better ones.
Mhm.
So being in the room doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a leader. Sometimes you could be brought in because you serve a different role to the organization.
That's really great. One of the things that I like to believe is that everybody, no matter what title of your position, everybody is capable of being a leader. And so I'm just kind of curious, you talked about sometimes when you're in a room being able to speak your voice, and for some individuals, sometimes that emerging leader in them, like it's a bit of a struggle, right? They're trying to fill it. They might be new to a role. They may have some insider ideas, but they're trying to kind of like evolve into this role. So what kind of advice do you give to individuals like that? Because sometimes I hear people, they get a position and they feel like it's that imposter syndrome, right? Like I have this position, but it's so new to me. How do I become an effective leader? And you're right that it's transformational, but what kind of advice would you give for those individuals who are these emerging leaders who are trying to kind of find their way in their leadership role, or even if it's not a title, but what kind of advice do you give for people like that who maybe have a little bit more trepidation to speak their voice at a table?
Sure. So I think there's a couple things there. The first, the things that make you successful as an associate or an employee are not the things that are going to make you successful as a leader. You continue to move up in your organization, and you're moving up because you were doing your role well. Whatever that defined role was you were doing and you excelled at, you got recognized, you're visible to leadership, and they promoted you for what you did, but they're promoting you to another role. And so it's almost like you're starting over again. And you have to take a step back and accept that. Because you're moving into a new role, whether it's a different role than you were in before, a leadership role over a team that you were in, you're in a new role. It's different skill sets. Doing something is different than being in review mode. Every leader needs to learn in that evolution when they're not doing anymore and they're in a review mode because they have other people on their team that may be doing what they were before, but their role has changed. So they are on the new, if you think of an S curve, and use it as a learning curve, they were on the upswing in their role, then they moved into a new role, and now they're on the bottom of the S curve and they start again, and so on and so on, the more they keep getting promoted. And if they take that into heart a little bit, and remember that they're growing, so they're learning a new skill set, they're stretching their muscles in ways that they weren't stretched before, that's how they keep themselves open to learning, right? They're not closed, to your point earlier, that they are just a box and this is what I do and this is all I do. So they keep themselves open to that trait, and that skill set is more valuable than a lot of other things in an employer's eyes and an interviewer's eyes. They're looking for those skill sets. They're looking for the associate that could be good over here, but maybe that they could be in the future, they could be something more, or something else, or in addition, and help the whole organization move its way up a little bit. So from that perspective, I would say that's the first part, is how do they look at that? Then to your question about how do they find their emerging voice, again, I don't worry about somebody finding their emerging voice after a certain period of time. It's I want them to find their voice. So the mentor part of me says, okay, I may talk with Dakota and we may talk about finding her emerging voice X, Y, and Z, but if I was sitting with you, Azelle, it might be A, B, and C. It could be different, and that's okay. No two people are going to find their emerging voice the same way. Part of it is understanding yourself and your own voice. What makes you tick? Are you a data-driven person? Are you somebody who's a visual learner versus a written word? Do you need facts and figures? Do you make decisions by your gut? It's good to know that about yourself. It's just as important to be able to read the signs of how you or Dakota make decisions, and that will tell me how I might speak and use my emerging voice. Because if I know I'm sitting in a room with all visual people and I don't have a visual prop, I know I'm going to lose them.
Mm-hmm.
So I have learned over time in developing my voice to read other people or to try to find out about the other people in the room. So I know how I'm coming in as a leader, as a presenter, as somebody who might have that emerging voice, and knowing when to speak. The most important part of show up, say something, have an opinion is knowing when to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's knowing what to say, good. Thinking of an idea just to interject, good. Knowing when to do it is just as important as finding your voice. But everybody's going to do it differently, and it's just taking the time. And sometimes you can sit in a room and you could sense the quiet ones. That's the mentor opportunity. The leaders in the room should sense that.
Mm-hmm.
If the good ones should be looking at that and then taking those conversations offline and seeing what they can do to help, especially if that person is a top performer. Is there something that we can help with from a mentor perspective with that emerging voice? You're not alone. So to your question, nobody on this stream that puts themselves in the category of an emerging voice but not sure when to use it or how to use it, it's the opportunity to either find somebody that can be a mentor or hopefully a good leader will find you, or both happens.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay, so I'm like trying to decide what question to ask next. Let me just check over here. Okay, we're good on this side. So we were kind of talking about your leadership experience. When do you feel like, was there ever this like aha moment in your experience? Like, okay, I really feel like I'm doing something, like I am an effective leader. Because from your career, you've had an amazing career, right? You started here and you've been all over the place. You've relocated many, many times, and you've landed yourself in this leadership role. Was there an instance throughout your journey that you're kind of like, okay, like you felt it, I don't know, I don't want to say like in your bones or in your skin, but like you really felt that you were being effective as a leader? Does that make sense?
It does. And as I think about different experiences, I would say you feel that energy, that flow. My role has a lot of different sides to it. I could be talking one-on-one like this with a financial professional, could be talking like this one-on-one with an associate who reports to me or doesn't report to me. So for me, or presenting just on stage or in a webinar like this, doing presenting, and you get that flow and that feeling of this is right. And to me, leading a team, having a conversation with a team, executing, developing something, bringing something to market, they all have those times where you feel excited, you feel nervous. If you weren't nervous, you probably weren't looking at every different side of a challenge or a problem, right? At least I believe that. Like, I'll double check something, I'll triple check something before we do something, and from that perspective. But not to digress, but coming back to that is that's how I know that I'm in the right role at the right time at the right place, is because I watch people's faces, and if I've impacted them in any way or given somebody, an associate or an external client, something that I didn't have before I talked, or something before I shared a comment or something, and I feel like the connection that we had for that one point in time, the dots that were connected were worth it, because it's going to hopefully snowball downstream to their end clients, and more than one, and hopefully provide a benefit or a solution that they didn't have before. So for me, that's how I know I made the right choice of being in the industry, being in the right choice of, am I in the right room at the right time? And even though I may sound like I moved a lot, but it was really, at the end of the day, it was only 3 companies over 25 years. At the end of the day, just opportunities that had me moving from a national location perspective, which some people may see it as a barrier. And I described earlier how it was an opportunity for me to follow. But that being said, that's how I have approached, or that feeling, to answer your question, how I know I'm in the right place at the right time, and in the last 10 years at the right company, because it's gone by in the blink of an eye. I would say the last 10 years has flown by as compared to the first 15. And that tells me I'm just in the right company compared to the first two. Even though the first two got me here, I wouldn't be here without going through those experiences.
Yeah.
And sometimes, there's an old saying, sometimes good decisions come from years and years of bad decisions, or experiences. You could plug the word in. Good experience comes from years and years of bad experience. You learn good and bad along the way. And I definitely say that without those first 15 years, it wouldn't have made this last 10 as good as they have been.
Very cool. Yeah. And you kept saying flow. And that to me reminds me of the theory of flow, right? Which is when you love something and you're good at it, that you kind of lose track of time. So you said the last 10 years have kind of flown by in the blink of an eye. So that could be that theory of flow, which I love to talk to about students, is finding something that you love and you're good at, that your work doesn't necessarily feel like work for you all the time. In some instances, work will feel like work, but other times you want to love what you're doing, right? That it goes by and it's enjoyable. We talked about lots of successes, but how do you feel about failure, and how do you deal with and learn from failure? Because there is no perfect leadership journey and experience. So how have you dealt with failure through, and how have you learned from failure through your leadership experience?
Yeah, going back to my comment about, you have to recognize that a bad experience is just that. It's an experience. It's a learning experience. And if you don't treat it like a learning experience, because you can get all mad at the experience and take yourself down a rabbit hole and stuff, but if you treat it as a learning experience, and I don't mean like if I did something wrong, it's not just owning it or talking to the client. I mean more than that. It's looking back and I refer to it as a post-mortem. You look back and say, okay, this situation, what was the situation? What did I do? How did I deal with it? What steps did I take in the process? What tactics and actions? And then I look back and say, okay, could I have done anything differently? If I did, what would I have done differently? I use that as an interview question all the time. Describe a situation, tell me the tactics you took, the actions, and then at the end, tell me what the resolution was. And then when they're done telling me that situational event, I'll ask them, if they look back on it, what would they do differently? And more often than not, the ones that have nothing to say about doing something differently are probably not the associates that you're wanting at your firm.
Right.
So I say that not to give the secrets away from an interview for everybody today, but I say that to be knowledgeable about who you are and what you need to do, to your point about learning from experiences. Like could always be something. You got to be a believer. If you believe that there's nothing that can be improved, then that's a whole different belief in an individual. I personally believe there's probably going to be something that I could have done better, whether it had been more efficient, faster. Could I have thought about it differently up front and it would have saved me work at the end? Yes. So the question is, do I take a second to think about that and reflect on it in a post-mortem kind of way and say, okay, if we ever have to do this again, what would we do differently, instead of repeating the same issues over and over? So for me, I think I don't fear failure. I think if you fear failure and you don't learn from it, that's the bigger fear,
right,
than anything else. And because failure just means you tried something.
Right.
So you tried something, it failed, but what did you do after that? Did you try and do it a different way? Did you just walk away? I give more credit if you tried to figure out the other saying, A to B or A to C. If you didn't try to figure out another way to get to your destination, then that's the failure.
Very cool.
Absolutely. I do want to remind our viewers that you are more than welcome to ask a question if you have anything that you want to ask our leader, whether that be just about leadership in general or maybe about the finance side of things with the career field. So just reminding our viewers to ask some comments if they would like to.
Good reminder. Okay. You have a question? I'm trying to what else can I ask while you're here?
I think a good one, especially for Cambridge, is what are some keys to developing the next generation? as a leader. I know with Cambridge, you guys really are very big on focusing on the next generation and how to build those people up as leaders. So do you have any keys to doing that?
Yeah, I think the key is organizational development. And I say that in such a way that if you have people on the stream today that are thinking about entering and they're ready to enter the career world, it's some of the things that they should be looking for out of an employer at the same time. Does an employer have organizational development internally or externally? So for Cambridge, to your question, Dakota, we have programs that are there for different associates along the way. There's program to develop core skills and knowledge of the roles inside of a financial solutions firm. And then those early associates that are identified as being a supervisor or a manager, we have a program that's referred to as aspiring leaders. So we don't want to just put somebody in a role and say, oh, you're now a manager, go manage, go lead, but they don't have any skill sets. This goes back to my question earlier. Somebody was so good as a top performer, when they get into a manager role, in this crude example, they may not have ever had any experience or education in what it takes to be a successful manager. So an aspiring leaders program is identify your top performers before they get into that role. Let them attend part of programs and coaching programs that build up those skills, because they've been identified as a top performer. So if you tap them to be a supervisor, manager, et cetera, they've got a foundation to start from. They're not starting from zero. So organizational development at that early stages, and then you keep building on that along the way to eventually you get up to more, I'll call it senior level development programs, and the teachers or the coaches that you bring in for a level up here to be at senior vice president or executive vice president is different than the person that you're bringing in for supervisor. And that's okay, because you continue to build on a knowledge base. Some of the skills that we might go through as a higher level leader might not be interviewing techniques or might not be managing conflict. They could be critical decision making. How do you teach critical decision making and how to analyze stuff that's outside of your purview, how to be part of a decision, bring people in the stuff, challenges that they may not normally be a part of. That's how you start to continue to develop a leader along the way. So for me, organizational development is the answer to that. And the firm, if you walk in as a candidate for a role, they're there to interview you, but you should have interview questions for the firm as well, because you don't want it to be short term. I think to my comment to Isel earlier is, you don't want to be looking at these companies and thinking of a 6-month or 1-year opportunities. So do your homework up front. Know if the more you can find your emerging voice in an interview about what you're looking for, what drives you, makes you happy, would help with success. Ask the company if they have these types of things, and that's how you become a transformational leader eventually.
Perfect. Thank you. We actually have a few questions coming in, so I want to ask one of them. One of our viewers wants to know what your thoughts are on servant leadership in the financial services world.
So, we kind of alluded to it almost a little bit ago. Everybody in an organization, Dakota, when you're asking me the things that my role as marketing officer does, I was describing sales and consulting, and there's a marketing aspect to it. But at the end of the day, we're all acting like an owner. Instead of using servant leadership, I'll say we're all acting as an owner of the company. And that's my career answer to a job answer as well, is you are there acting like, doesn't make a difference. Whatever you can do, you do, even if it's not my area. If I have a client that's on the phone, but it's not in any one of my 5 areas that I oversee personally, tell that they've been bounced around 3 times, I'm not passing them on. So to me, that is a servant leadership. That is, I'm taking the time, I'm listening to the issue without just saying, is this me? It's not me. Let me get it to you to somebody else. So for me, in the financial services, when it comes to a servant leadership, the financial professional out there who's actually working with the end client, they have a lot more emotion, right? The end client who's worrying about retirement, worrying about having enough money if the stock market goes up or down, and pay their bills as they stop working, their degree of servant leadership and the emotion is a lot more than me. I'd live more in a business to business world, but the RN financial advisors are more business to consumer. So there's different degrees of emotion, and but at the end of the day, the mindset that I think we try to employ, going back to your earlier question about how do we develop people, is that it doesn't make it, there's no finger pointing. It's the servant leadership is being there, not necessarily saying yes to everything, but listening to a client's needs, listening to their concerns. That to me is servant leadership. The outcome of it being, yes, we can do this, no, we can do that, is just a tactic. Servant leadership is an approach to the conversation. The joke, I keep saying cliches, right? So the joke is servant leadership to me is 2 ears and 1 mouth. You're listening more than you're talking. And then to your emerging voice, Izelle, the emerging voice is knowing when to use your voice too in that scenario, and that's servant leadership as well.
Cool. We have another question. So there's actually two from one, I think, student. So wanting to know the difference between finance and accounting. So maybe help clarify that for the student. And what is one thing, I really like this question, what is one thing you wish you knew as a college student before you started your career?
Okay, so finance and accounting, and I agree, it's a lot of general terms, right? Finance could mean a lot of things. Finance can mean economics. Finance can mean financial services. It can mean investments. Then you get to accounting, and some of accounting can be connected to financial services. And they're all good backgrounds. If somebody was asking that question in the vein of, if I had an accounting degree, can I be in financial services? The answer is yes, and I think you described that in your opening, Izelle. There's no one financial services I would describe as, you could be. I went to school for financial services, but I could be the anomaly. A lot of financial professionals out there could be career changers. They could have been teachers and then they became a financial professional. I know of one here in town, here locally, basketball coach who also does insurance and investments on the side. So they have different careers. They could be co-careers or next generation careers in a change. From that perspective, a firm like Cambridge, when Dakota was talking about the size and shape of Cambridge, we have so many different areas of the firm. We're just not all financial services and investments. What I mean by that is we have an accounting department. We need people to do accounting, compensation, and other stuff. We have a legal department, so we need attorneys, and we need people who can evaluate risk. We have a marketing department on my side. I need graphic designers. I need people who can write copy and do other things. We have people that are on the investment side of things. So we need people who are more experienced in financial products and services. So if the question is can my accounting degree or my finance degree translate? Yes. Skill sets can translate. And I think you were talking about this earlier or starting to, is a lot of skill sets translate. It's the soft skills that you develop as an associate, an employee, and as a leader. That's the transferable skill that's valuable. The other stuff to me is knowledge. And I break that conversation into different categories. There's educational, and that's knowledge base. There's core skills, the things that you need to know as an associate. And then there's, say, consulting and leadership. And those are 3 different boxes. So depending on how the person was asking that question, it could be good. There's a difference between the two, I agree, and the types of things that can be done. But they're also, depending on your other soft skills, will make you a valuable and transferable employee. Whether it's leadership in financial solutions or you're in financial solutions today, and then you go to an engineering firm with accounting degree, those are the transferable skills that you need to focus and develop on besides your knowledge and your core skill, your education.
Perfect.
So your second question was, what would I know if I was back in college?
Yeah. What's one thing you wish you knew as a college student before you started your career?
So I told you part of my entry into college. I told you I wanted to go to school for aviation. And I was always doing accounting or finance stuff in high school. We had aviation classes as electives. I had accounting classes as electives. I took both of those. So I was vacillating on both sides of those things going in. So I thought I was going into the right program. So when I chose aviation, I've always wanted to fly. I love airplanes. My family had a travel agency growing up, so grew up around airplanes and stuff. So I had just happened to be talking with a pilot, and with me, I don't see with both eyes at the same time. So I could have got what's called special permission to fly commercially. So I'm in first year of college. I meet this pilot. I'm having this conversation, and he's like, and I'm thinking to myself, I can get special permission, but he goes, yeah, you can get special permission, but 10 years down the road, if the FAA changes a rule, you're out of a career. So that is why I changed from aviation to finance that second year of school, is because of that conversation. So as I look back on it, and I say I don't look back on with many regrets, but it was probably one pilot. I probably should have had more than one pilot conversation, because I still have a desire to fly. I probably still could have flown, from all the people I've talked to since then about being approved to fly. So it was probably something I took away from myself, not anything that so when I say I should have known to talk to more people, and instead of letting what I thought was one leading conversation flip the switch for me.
Right. No, good advice. And if you need help with career interviews, come visit our office. We can help you talk to people. All right, we are close to wrapping up. So I'm going to maybe give you a minute or two just to maybe answer one last question. Which question do you think it should be, Dakota?
We actually have one other question. It's from Lindsay. She actually works in our office, and she had to create a YouTube account to ask it on here, so she chatted it to me. So she says, you mentioned several times about knowing yourself. I know there are a lot of assessments that professionals use to identify strengths and areas of improvement. So her first question is, do you recommend using those types of assessments? So probably the Myers-Briggs,
DISC
assessment, all of those. Which ones do you recommend?
So Iselle, did you say DISC?
DISC, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So both. So Myers-Briggs, I've done that earlier. I'm an ENTP, so I still know it 25 years later. I kind of, who you are with, I'm a perceiver, a thinker, et cetera. So I also believe in the DISC. I used an alternative to DISC. It was a local consultant there in Phoenix. He called his social styles, but it's basically the same 4 boxes and the same 4 categories. So when I was talking earlier about knowing people who use facts or figures, people who make decisions from the gut, people who like to work in a group environment, or drivers to get work done or decisions made, those all from social styles. So I probably gravitate more to the social styles DISC perspective every day for the last 25 years than I have the Myers-Briggs. But it doesn't mean that I didn't learn something from the Myers-Briggs test. Yeah. I personally think if I can't remember 80 different profiles, and all the intricacies of 100-question aptitude test, I'm probably not going to use it much as a leader. Right. So DISC and my counterpart, social styles, gave me the foundation, the stuff that I could use every day in conversation, and it's always in my head. So find the tool. Don't sell something that you don't understand. Don't talk about a personality test or a self-assessment test that you yourself can't understand, and then repeat to somebody else, is my advice to that person who asked that question. And I use it every day for interviewing. I use it every day to sit in a room, even at the leadership table that you asked about earlier, Dakota. I could sit at our leaders, our 8 senior leaders of the firm, our executive team, and I know which ones are visual learners, and I know which ones are written word, and what I need to put in front of them. And that's self-assessment as much as it is for myself. It's as much as me recognizing their self-assessments at the same time. So it's a good question that person asked. So I probably, if they haven't done the DISC or something like DISC in the 4 categories, that's probably where I would start.
Cool. Yeah. And I mean, if anybody ever has the opportunity to take them, you're right. It's a good a good way to kind of learn yourself and how you can work with others, but it's also good to know what other people on your team, what their preferred styles are. So it makes for easier collaboration.
Yeah.
Okay, so one last question, because I mean, time has flown by. In 1 minute, what can students or our viewers, or what wisdom can you share with our viewers who are maybe completing the degree and embarking on their leadership journey? So what wisdom can you share with people that are starting their leadership journey or are going to be completing their degrees soon?
I think I hit on a couple of them already. So one is, sponge. I kind of joked about that in the beginning, but I take that to heart is, if you're completing your degree, getting ready to embark on that journey, you've completed the journey of knowledge, right? So my 3 buckets again, right? You're moving from the journey of knowledge, and now you got to combine your journey of knowledge with learning experiences. And how do you put those 2 things together? How do you use that? And part of this is everybody at that point's got to figure out their emerging voice, right? How do you absorb those experiences? Combine it with your knowledge base, and then how do you use that to your benefit as an associated employee to benefit the firm or the company that you're working for? So for me, that's where I think I'll come back to those 2 things and say you have to recognize those opportunities and take the good with the bad. Mm-hmm. Take the good experiences. Don't get frustrated by the bad ones. Figure out, because sometimes the top performer can take a bad experience from the group or somebody else and find an alternative solution, and it now becomes a good experience for the better of the company, right? It's not, there's always going to be people who think about themselves, but then there's going to be the people who think about themselves and the firm at the same time. Mm-hmm. And the best journey is if you can accomplish both, that you become a top performer and the company becomes a top performer because of some of the things that you've done or said or been involved with, and part of projects, et cetera. Like that to me will define the leadership. And then the last thing I'll say is you got to remember it's about application. You're going to learn a lot more than you did on your first knowledge journey. You're going to continue learning experiences, and you're going to learn new knowledge. New things happen. Our industry for financial services has changed. Regulations have changed in the 25 years since I've been in. It's not the same. We're continually learning. So application was my third leg of that stool. To your question, Azelle, is remember, it's how you apply your knowledge and your skills that is going to make you either a top performer, leader, or both.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us and share what it's been like through your transformational journey from college to leadership. For our viewers, I hope that you can join us next month as we host another leader from a different industry. So again, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us and sharing and imparting your wisdom to us and to our audience. So with that, we'll sign off and hope to see everybody on the next one.
Bye, everybody.